I think it's now time to present you how this program was born. Here you see. The program was born really as a science and technology and innovation, science and innovation, a kind of a chemical reaction, which had three raw materials and two catalyzers. These real raw materials were science diplomacy, innovation diplomacy, and a secret raw materials that will be revealed to you firsthand in a few minutes. And the two catalyzers were the Institute of Advanced Studies, where we are here, and FAPESP, that you know was critical for our, like a catalyzer, to make this happen. And so, with this chemical reaction, we got to inside São Paulo. Science and diplomacy is the ingredient that has the input of research. The Institute of International Relations has this issue as a subject, mainly taken by Professora Janina, who is now the dean of the school, and she has an ongoing connection with Professor Simone Turchetti, who was with us here. So science diplomacy is one of the ingredients, one of the raw materials. In terms of practice, we have Secretary Pedro Ivo from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who, very interesting story. He is an engineer by training. He is now in diplomacy, but engineer by training. And his advisor is the current deputy director of the Institute of International Relations. So at some point he came to Brazil. He's Brazilian, obviously. And Professor Moacir, the deputy director of the Institute of International Relations, said, why don't we hear him? He is involved in innovation diplomacy, which is kind of a new field. Let's hear him. So there was a small seminar, and this is a second extremely important ingredient because, as we say in Brazil, at the end of the game, engineer secretary, master, Pedro became one of the people who carried the piano, as we say here, to help move things on with Gabriela and with the whole team, but Pedro was extremely important. The secret ingredient is here. The raw material will be presented to you, and as was said, it focused on the issue of education. The institute where we are gave the ambience, not only the physical ambience, but also the ambience for interdisciplinarity, and we have a long-standing connection between the two institutes, and FAPESP gave the essential catalyzer, which are the financial resources. Without it, we couldn't move from the idea from the dream to what's happening. Now, about the secret ingredient. Well, the secret ingredient is not so complicated as usually it happens. It is basically a course called Science, Technology and Innovation International Dimension, which in the structure of the university has this code EAD, which has to do with department or where this course is being offered, the management department in the business school, and 5966 is some code which is generated by some algorithm which I don't know exactly how it works, but I don't care. This is a course that's given together by Alberto Pfeiffer, who couldn't come this morning because he has another commitment, and myself, and we'll have here the presentation also with Guilherme de Rosso Mansos, a good friend now, and who Alberto and myself got to know in the first edition of this course when he was a student. At that time he was doing his master, and he'll talk later. So I'll focus on the following 6 aspects. Why is this course? What is the course? For whom? How we propose and how we develop the course, so what happened, and a brief mention of the team. Why? Firstly, because, as we are seeing here, there are international dimensions to almost every aspect of science, technology, and innovation. We saw it in science. We'll see it in innovation, which has to do also with technology during this week. And I won't get into details here because immediately after we have Pedro's presentation that he'll dwell into the issue of innovation. We heard last week about science a lot, including more conceptual aspects such as Professor Ruffini presented, history as Simone Turchetti presented, trade as Vera Torstensen presented, the testimony, very emotional, geopolitical, and I would say beyond that, that was presented by Professor Eliezer Rabinovich. So I think this is clear to you from now. If, by the way, if not, you wouldn't be here if you wouldn't believe in that. Nowadays, science, technology, innovation play a crucial role in public and private governance, in foreign policies of nation states, and in international affairs of civil society organizations, transnational corporations, third sector organizations, and knowledge academia, among others. And we are in this period that you're here, in the middle of an issue which has to do with a lot of dimensions, the issue of environment of the Amazon, that obviously has science, technology elements very clearly present, and also some innovation elements that I might or might not have time to elaborate, if maybe during questions and answers, if it's of interest. This crucial role is either by being a locus for cooperation between nations and other actors, or for establishing unsurmountable advantages in the case of conflicts. So we are not naive. It's not only good sesame that we saw, but science, technology, innovation is much, it's very present much more as time goes by in the issue of the competition between nations, and competition very often gets to conflict, as we can see in the Middle East, obviously, but also in other regions, Southeast Asia, and several other regions. Well, the course aims at equipping graduate students with the tools needed to understand the complex problems at the intersection of science, technology, innovation issues, and international affairs. I'll go back to that in a second. Between state and or private entities as a source of cooperation or conflict in the international arena. The basic elements that I would like to leave here is that this encounter between science, technology, innovation, and international relations, as we call it here, is broader than innovation and science diplomacy. It doesn't reduce the importance of innovation and science diplomacy, but just as it has been mentioned, and we'll repeat, and Charles Weiss will follow, we are seeing other aspects beyond diplomacy. Now what? We have 5 thematic modules, a graduate course by the rules of university here. It's 15 classes, 4 hours each, and obviously homework. The first module has to do, I hope you can see it because it's kind of clear, science, technology, innovation as a resource of power in international affairs. So the basic idea is how nations can leverage its role by using science, technology, innovation. And we begin with really what is in the origin of Brazil, which is the Portuguese, or Portugal at the time in the 15th century. A small country, very far west in Europe, trying to develop world presence, and having done that with enormous success by the expeditions to find India and etc., and also Brazil, and that was based on, at the time, science, technology, and if you would like also some innovation, which is called Sagres, a school, a place, we would say, where at the time, several technological developments, artifacts, concepts, people met, and the Sagres was a basic element for the projection, for the leverage of Portugal's presence in the world at that time. Coming to our times here, to the case, for instance, we also tackle other cases, but the case of Israel that we heard here last week from Consul Alon Lavie. So again, it's a very small country, 1/400th of Brazil, but which has a relevance in, through this area, startup nation, etc., and dealing with China, India, the United States, etc., in a level that is only allowed because science, technology, innovation has been an element of the strategy of the country. The second is institutionalization of international cooperation in science, technology, innovation. Obviously, we look at aspects such as the Brazil-Europe, the European Horizon 2020, etc. relationship, but we also look at other aspects, mainly regional. For instance, a program that was created in the 80s by Spain called, and the acronym in Spanish is CITED, Science and Technology for Development. A very interesting program that was created at the time by the Spanish government when 1492 was approaching. 1492 was when Columbus arrived in what is now called the New World of our Americas. And as you know, the encounter between Spain and the Americas has various aspects, and some of them not so pleasant. And Spain, who had just left the period of Franco, was trying at the time to create a new image in the world in general, in Europe in particular, but with the Spanish countries of the Americas, and also, why not, also the Portuguese-speaking countries of America. So they created a program called CITED /D, D from 500 in Latin, the Latin number, which would provide resources for establishing cooperation, not only between Spain and Latin American countries, but between Spain, Portugal, and Latin American countries, and very much among the Latin American countries. At that time, I was part of this program in one specific area. At that time, the best way to fly from here to Quito, capital of Ecuador, was to fly to Miami and then to Quito, etc., etc. So it means at that time, there was not only very little airline connection between the Latin American countries, but also there was very little cooperation between Latin American countries. South-South cooperation, as one can say, in spite of Mexico not being the South among other countries, but not entering in the issue of geography, where the equator is what is called generally quote-unquote South-South cooperation. So this program was extremely successful, and it became later a multilateral program as the D was cut off after 1992, and it exists until today with other dimensions, also similar to Eureka, European cooperation among small companies entered, and here we have Ibero-ECA. So all this issue of the Ibero-American space appears through international cooperation, and this is also discussed. The third module is the Brazilian Science, Technology and Innovation Foreign Policy. You heard it with much detail from our invited guest from Itamaraty here, our secretary of this area in Itamaraty, Luis, and so I won't get into details. The fourth module, the who factor, the relevant actors dealing with international cooperation in science, technology, and innovation. So we have public companies such as Embrapa, who is a federal R&D company, but operates as a company, public company, and is instrumental to what was presented before, for instance, in the relation of Brazil with Africa and African countries, and why it's important, what it has to do with the strategy of Brazil at the time, having to do with a lot of issues, including getting a permanent seat in the Security Council in the UN. And so this is for one idea of one public company. We have also obviously private companies, multinational companies. Tomorrow we have here a panel with some of these companies. You'll hear this. There are NGOs cooperating, universities cooperating. So it's the fourth module has to do with the who factor, entering a bit in some of the organizations that are involved with that. And finally, the New World, Critical Contemporary Questions, International Affairs. We have a lot of them. We have the issue of cybersecurity. We have the issue of environment. We have the issue of the nuclear subject, a lot of issues. So I would say these are a palette of different aspects, and each time a different aspect is more focused. For whom? We had 4 editions of this course. 2016, 17, 18, we are currently in the 4th edition. I must say that this course, which is one of the not so many courses provided in English in the university, at the time of the very few courses provided in English, had to do with an effort of the universities in general in Brazil and of this university in specific to be more international. We have been first, because it's important for research, etc., for other purposes, and second, because when, our position in the international rankings, one of we have in some aspects very good positions, and in the issue of internationalization, we have not so good position. Obviously, one can discuss. It's easier to get international if you are sitting in Belgium than if you are in Brazil, because of geography. You take a car, and in 3 hours you crossed at least 2 borders. But let's not go into it. Let's go to the positive way. So the idea of offering a course in English was part of this strategy. We have an average of 15 participants selected, and the quality of the participants that you'll see through Guilherme is relevant for that purpose. A majority is of USP graduate students from different programs, not only from business school, in spite of being being at the business school, from different schools, engineering, sciences, etc. Always several foreign graduate students, mostly from Europe, from cooperation, and we have always also practitioners present. There is a rule that practitioners can be maximum half of the quota of regular students, so it means a third of the group, let's say around 5, are of practitioners. How? Multi and interdisciplinary approach. Examples are based on real cases related to issues on environment, health, energy security, development, and foreign affairs, interwoven with the historical, political, economic, social, and cultural concerns of international relations. 5 pillars. The first pillar is interesting bibliography, and we created a platform, and so for each edition we add, so we have a lot of interesting, I would say, very exciting materials that was not so known in the beginning here in Brazil, including some articles of Professor Charles Weiss, who just, hello, good morning, just is with us already. Relevant invited speakers, both Brazilian and foreign, and Guilherme will show a picture with one of the invited speakers in a few minutes, and we had Professor Charles Weiss being an invited speaker from sitting in Washington, but through video, and several others. Some of them became or became relevant actors in the Brazilian scenery. For instance, Marcos Truijo, who at the time was floating around, he is now as a secretary for international trade in the Ministry of Economy, which is the strongest, I would say, ministry in this government. The third, some add-ons, I would say, using elements, visual elements that are available in the internet, and discussing them, and events. The university and São Paulo in general is a very rich environment for things are happening which has to do with our subject, so we have some antennas, and the participants also bring things which are happening, conferences on, I don't know, or seminars on startups or whatever it is. And so we use this opportunity to make the connections and add elements, networking amongst the participants, and we have always a very active teaching assistant, and something which is called Chavruta, which is learning in pairs. So we, it's a concept that came really from the Jewish tradition, from the Talmudic studies, but has been spread in several other environments, and one where it has became a fever is in South Korea. As you know, South Korea is a very competitive society in terms of education and getting access to good universities, etc., etc. So if you ask Professor Google, you'll find more elements, but it's very interesting that this specific pedagogical learning process of discussion and questioning among peers has been now spread around. So what? Well, in terms of outputs, we have, I think, the following outputs. First, obviously, as the students are graduate students, and they came for several reasons, interest in general, but probably also has to do with what they are doing on their research. And so chapters for master thesis or doctoral dissertations happened. Papers which are obviously used for evaluation, but also are some of them get to be published, were developed or born or developed during the course, and Guilherme, I think, is one of the authors, and he'll explain what. This year, after 4 editions, we are preparing a book comprising selected papers and a community of people that, as you will see with Guilherme, are future key peoples in this society. Obviously, you can ask, what about more outcomes? I would say one outcome is a contribution, one of the elements, that secret ingredient for this program, and this will hopefully expand and will continue beyond this this edition. I think we still have to work how the universities, the state of São Paulo and Brazil can make better use of what we have been developing during this course. As a team, myself, Pedro was so kind to introduce me. Alberto Pfeiffer, he is from the coordinator of the Center for Analysis of International Scenario from the Institute of International Relations. So it's basically a combination also between somebody who has been focusing during 25 years in this issue of science, technology, innovation, and Alberto, who has a sensitivity, obviously, for science, technology, and innovation for different reasons, but as a researcher, as an officer, both in government and in trade organizations, he has a very formal preparation in international relations, so we both made a chavruta, so that's how the idea of chavruta appeared. We have always a teaching assistant, the current teaching assistant. He is one of the founders of a new, very interesting NGO called Question of Science, which is making a beautiful effort to recover the value of science in the Brazilian society, which has been obliterated during the last times for different reasons. And we have also a very active secretary who makes us not forget things and operates and provides all the connection with university bureaucracy.